Gators Breakdown, the Gators fan podcast, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And this back, the Gator Panel 2019 edition. Uncle Silk from the Big Three Roll-Up and Stadium Gale and myself gather the best media members covering the Florida Gators. And we know you guys got a big kick out of the Gator Panel last year when we first did it a year ago. And, of course, we were bringing it back, bringing you all the thoughts and analysis from Will Sammon from The Athletic, Thomas Goldkamp from Swamp 24/7, Nick De La Torre from Gator Country, and Dan Thompson from Gator Country and Stadium and Gale as well. So a lot of good stuff is covered in this episode from all of us, and we hope you check it out. Hope you like it, and be sure to reach out to us on social media. Both of us, Stadium and Gale, Big Three Roll Up, Gators Breakdown, and let us know what you think. A lot of good stuff here. A lot of good stuff for the next hour or so. So be sure to follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. Follow me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And here is the 2019 edition of the Gator Panel.
Welcome to another Gator Panel. It's Uncle Silk from the Big Three Roll-Up. I got my man Dave Waters with me. Dave?
Man, we 2019 edition here. Glad I could get some people together, talk some Gators football once again. This was a big hit last year, and of course we had to do it again.
All right, everybody introduce themselves. We have a little bit of everything. We got my man Dan Thompson from, where you from now, Dan? Stadium and Gale?
Stadium and Gale and Gator Country. Got to hold it down for the OG.
We got Nick De La Torre.
Nick De La Torre, Gator Country.
And Will Simone.
There you go, right? Yeah.
And my man Will Sammon.
Will Sammon from The Athletic.
All right, guys.
And Thomas Goldkamp. Don't forget Thomas.
Oh,
yeah, man. What's that, Silk?
My bad, dog. I'm looking right at you, too. We have Thomas Goldkamp from 247. Thomas, what's up, man?
I'm good, man. Glad to be back on.
Glad to have you guys. I was a short notice this time, but everybody kind of jumped right on, and we jumped right on tonight after we agreed. So me and Dave going to mix it up. He's going to ask some questions. I'll ask some questions.
Y'all jump in and ask some questions?
Yeah, we're going to try not to keep it as too homer, but it's an elephant in the room. Right off the bat, we had the Huggins and media situation with Dan Baker and whatnot. So what's your opinion on that, Thomas Goldkamp? I know you a guy that kind of had that information before it got released, but you didn't put it out there. What's your opinion on the way it was presented to Mullen and the way Mullen handled it afterwards as far as shutting down access to the team?
Yeah, I don't know if the access shutdown was related or not. It probably was, but it really wasn't a whole lot of access that we lost. I think most people on the beat would agree with that. We really weren't seeing much. Personally, I think the biggest issue that I have with the whole thing is I thought it could have been handled better, given the fact that UF had been approached behind the scenes, talking to the sports information director and whatnot. Basically, we had gotten comments from UF on Monday night about the situation, and we basically were trying to talk to UF and try to have that handled in a situation where we could maybe get Dan Mullen off to the side, off camera. And for whatever reason, I don't know the reason, that UF didn't want to do that, but they basically said, no, that's okay. We don't have a lot of time. You guys are free to ask Dan on camera. And I think the way that it played out became kind of a gotcha moment. And it became more of a spectacle than it really should have been. And so that to me, that's the biggest issue I have, is I think it could have been handled differently on both sides, from the media and UF. But I think at the end of the day, there were obviously some issues with Huggins, and they were brought to light. And I guess kind of that's where we're at now,
Nick, you got anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Thomas said, I didn't expect it to blow up. And I mean, it kind of became a national thing, too. And I get it, because it's Dan Mullen and it's Florida, so it becomes a big national thing. I get that. But like Thomas said, I think we offered to have that chance to, off to the side where it's not live streaming on YouTube and to just get some clarity on the situation. Because, I mean, it's not like we were asking about some kid, some walk-on or somebody. This is going to be a kid that was going to play. And I think I wrote after spring, I was like, yo, put Trey Dean at safety so you can get Huggins on the field. So I think it was a kid that we were getting asked questions a lot. Hey, is he at practice? What is he doing? Is he around? And it's no, he's not. So, and then the other thing is that we all requested the police reports, or if anything had gone on with Huggins, I know I did over a month ago. It just so happened we got those police reports Sunday night, like at 8 p.m. the night before we were supposed to talk to Dan Mullen. So, I mean, that also doesn't help the case. We could have gotten it, a month ago and not, 8 hours before, 9 hours before a press conference. And now we're kind of springing things on him. And we're still trying to familiarize ourselves with the police report and do all that kind of stuff.
Will Sammon, quick question. What do you think, from an outsider's perspective, what do you think the perception of the program is right now?
It's probably misinformed. I think that from like a large perspective, from like that big picture perspective of it, you see the 5 incidents of alleged violence toward women. And I think the first sort of inclination for a lot of people is to point to a, quote, culture, unquote, issue or problem. And it's a little bit unfair when people do that because they're coming at it from just like this. I don't want to completely say uninformed because it's a topic that, you want to be very critical of when that's where a thing does happen. But context is pretty important in a lot of those issues. And so we do have that happen at Florida in particular, when you have a series of incidents like this that are completely unrelated and are just not exactly, I guess, at all related to one another, and they just sort of happen with individual people. I think the reaction from people outside the program or who don't cover the program every day is to kind of tie it all together because that's convenient for people to do. And if you don't have a lot of the facts, or if you don't have a lot of background on those issues or what has happened since, or the discipline actions that have been taken afterward, then I understand that that's what people will do. But I think that's probably what the perception is, whether that's right or wrong. To a large degree, it's a little bit uninformed, but that's probably what the perception is.
And I think part of that is because UF didn't want to get ahead of it, which I think is wrong. You have to imagine that Dan Mullen knew that this question was coming, and I don't think that he answered the question correctly. But I think part of it has to do with kind of the first article that came out that spread was, this is all of the issues that Florida has, and then nowhere in there did it mention that Florida has dismissed all of them, or if you did, you had to get all the way down towards the end. And I think once that happened, and once you highlight all 5 instances in a row, and then you don't really say, hey, this is what Florida has done, or there's no additional, I guess, research that is provided about what Florida is doing, and there's no question that was asked about what is Florida doing to try to make sure that these problems are ameliorated in the future, then that's what people run with. And then you have people that have hundreds of thousands of followers that are tweeting, look at this huge cultural problem at Florida. And Florida could have probably mitigated that at the beginning with a better answer. But since they didn't, is what people ran with, and then that's the narrative. And now you have to play damage control for a few days before everybody's like, well, hold on, there is probably more to the story. Oh, yeah, by the way, Florida did alleviate all 4 players and the one coach that was involved.
Hey, Nick, you were there. We were in Hoover SEC Media Days, and a lot of the stuff was coming out before then. And when Dan Mullen was straight up asked in the room that we got before he went out to the national media, he was straight up asked about Huggins because of a lot of the rumors and stuff that were going around. And it kind of started there because Mullen came out and said he's still with the team, he's still taking classes, he'll be part of the team. Then we get to the first practice of fall camp, and he's not there. So of course the questions were going to we're going to arise again and keep getting hounded on. And the family issue is still kind of where they kind of started out when fall camp started. So it dates back a month and a half now, and it just kind of kept growing from there. And another part about this, as far as the narrative and what we heard and everything the last couple of weeks, was the one thing that got on my nerves was Dan Mullen not doing enough about education and prevention because of these 5 players. Look, 2 of the guys, it doesn't matter what education or prevention that you would have brought in Justin Watkins and Jalen Jones. those guys weren't on campus long enough. They brought their issue. You could say they brought their issues with them, and it's not a matter of, hey, the cultural problem at UF is what caused this. No, those guys weren't even on campus long enough for whatever education prevention programs that Florida has to make a difference.
Well, Florida does talk about it, and we had Lee Begley on Stadium and Gale on Monday night, and she mentioned that at every practice and then every semester they do have discussions about sexual violence, sexual awareness, things of that nature. So I think it's wrong to assume, and I'm not saying that that's what you're saying, but I think it's wrong to assume by a lot of people out there that Florida didn't do enough. At the end of the day, there's 115 players probably associated with the university. You recruit the same guys that everybody else is recruiting. You do your best to try to make sure that they're putting themselves, in smart situations, in the best situations possible. And at the end of the day, you have to hope that these guys are guys that are listening to you and that are making those right decisions, especially in those spur of the moment type of situations. So, I think that Florida can do what they're doing. I think that the university is doing a lot. There's a lot that the university does as well outside of the football team. So I think it's tough to ascribe to that notion that they weren't told enough either.
Hey, Thomas, do you think we have an attrition issue?
When you say that, you mean too many guys leaving the program?
Absolutely.
I don't think so. I think it's pretty typical in the first year or two of a coach to have a lot of that. I think there's probably been maybe a couple more than normal in terms of discipline, but I don't think it's anything crazy.
Anybody else want to chime in on that?
I don't think. I think the culture problem has been thrown around a lot, and I don't agree with that at all. I don't think there's a culture problem. It's like fans. It's like you guys have said. When something happens, I think Mullen does let due process play out, and there's a lot of what's going on in our culture now, not just with sports or politics. Just our culture it's just a cancel culture. It's something happens, hey, get them off, get them fired, get their life's over because they made a mistake. I think Dan Mullen's not a detective. He's not a judge. He's not trying to play judge and jury. He's going to let stuff play out. And he's going to get more information than we have. He's going to have more information than the fans. So I think he's waiting to see what he needs to see before he starts, chopping heads or kicking people out of the program. The only other thing, just from us in the media, I don't think anyone in the media is biased against Dan Mullen or trying to get Dan Mullen out. I was here in 2013. I can tell you last year was a lot more fun to cover than 2013. We may not be rooting for Florida on Saturday because it's not our job to, but we're not rooting for Florida to lose. And I think that's, sometimes when we report bad stuff or something happens and we report it, it's, why are you reporting this? Well, that's my job too. But I can just tell you, and I think Thomas will echo it and Will echo it. Covering a winning team is a lot more fun than covering a losing team.
I don't know if people are accusing you guys, and I know that you guys aren't the ones that are at that kind of the center of this issue. I don't know if people are not wanting you guys to ask those questions. I think what people want is kind of that fairness that comes with explaining the full story, right? So I think part of that is, a follow-up question. Well, then what are you guys doing, if we have an issue where you have now, a fourth player on your team that has an issue with something related to sexual violence, then the follow-up question should be by somebody, then what are you guys doing internally? Or, follow-up questions. And obviously there's ways that you can check, with the SID or whomever in the media department there to kind of give the full story. I think it's tough when that story gets reported on that you have, your fourth player and then your fifth person associated with the program, has an issue of sexual violence. And it's basically cast in the way that an article is written as, hey, Florida has all of these issues and we're not going to then, research what they're doing to potentially solve that problem. I think that's what people are more, curious about.
Yeah. And look, I understand that. I understand that completely. I think kind of going back to what Nick said and what I was trying to get at a little bit earlier is I think that there was a lot on Huggins that was going on, obviously behind the scenes. Okay, so he was off the field for whatever reason, whether it was family situation or something else that hadn't even been reported on. He wasn't at camp. He was a guy that was a key player, and I think part of what happened in the way the question was phrased to Dan Mullen was people trying to tie in a way to appropriately ask him, and I think the way that came out was, okay, we can tie it into these other issues and say, okay, frame it in this bigger picture question. And I think that's the way it came out. And I think it looked like a gotcha moment. Whereas I think if we had been able to sit down and talk with Dan behind the scenes and explain, hey, we're not necessarily saying that you have a problem with your program, but like, these incidents are out there. Where's your take on that? I think it would have probably played out a little differently than maybe looking like a spectacle, because there was other stuff out there on Huggins. The people that went for the police reports weren't necessarily looking for this October incident. But once it pops up, you start to have internal discussions with your editors, even other reporters on the beat about, okay, how do we handle this? And somebody, one reporter obviously took it and framed it in a bigger context. And so that ended up playing out looking like a culture issue, where maybe that was really just a way to try to get it, responded to, I guess, from USN. And I'm not saying that was the right approach necessarily, but I think that's kind of how it unfolded, more than like, okay, we're trying to stick UF with this big culture problem.
Will, one more thing here on this before we get into some football.
Yeah, one other thing is Florida can't really say much at all when it comes to what they're doing in these circumstances either. And I think that's a valid point to bring up, because we're never ever going to come away from those press conferences feeling all of a sudden enlightened about why a certain kid is no longer on the team or why somebody's not playing. It's never ever going to happen. And another thing is, this school works really closely with I should say the athletic department works really closely with student conduct and conflict resolution at UF. And so if that side of things is telling them, hey, handle this kid this way, they're going to handle that kid that way. And that may mean playing him or that may mean sitting him, but they're not going to cross what they've been told to do. And that's not going to be said, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case, because when we hear words like protocol or process or words like that, none of that stuff has any meaning. But if you read between the lines, I think that's what they're saying.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much about addressing this particular situation as much as it is, Will, you and I were there when we saw Dan Mullen speak at the Tampa Gator Club, and there was a lot of questions about Chris Steele, and there's a lot of follow-up to, well, what does your process look like when X happens? When a kid is looking to transfer or enter the transfer portal, what are those discussions? Or if they say that they're homesick, or they say that they want to be closer to family, or that it's not cutting, what kind of conversations are you having? I think that could have probably been an adequate follow-up, and I don't know if anybody, myself or anybody that's critical, can't speak for all of Gator Twitter because you know how they can get. But, I think at the end of the day, a lot of people are just wondering, well, where are those follow-up questions about, maybe what does protocol look like and what do you guys do to educate? And I think that's the way it could have been framed a little bit different. But I totally get it. And I know that there's other issues going on behind the scenes. So, but job well done to you guys, because you guys are fantastic people.
Fantastic. Football now, guys? Good there?
Do it.
All right, we'll start top. Probably, of course, starts with quarterback Felipe Franks. Do we make too much out of his end-of-season run last year and how it'll translate to 2019? Nick?
I think, obviously, you can name the things. It was a Michigan team that didn't want to be in the game and sat a bunch of players. It was a bad Florida State team. It was Idaho. It was a bad South Carolina team. I don't care. I was as critical, I think, as anybody about Felipe Franks, and at least for me, he made me a believer. I'm still at the standpoint where I need to see it again. Were those things that I just mentioned, are those actual things, or are those just, something that a rival fan would point to and say, no, he hasn't turned the corner. These are the reasons why. But I've gotten to the point with Felipe Franks where I'm expecting for him to show me that, you should believe that I have turned the corner. So I don't get I don't know what the transition was. I don't know what did it for him. I don't know if it was he needed to tell everyone in that stadium to shut up, myself included, and that took a weight off his back. But I think Felipe Franks, in my opinion, will be and can be, especially in this offense, the way that he can run, the way that he started to run at the end of the year, can be one of the better quarterbacks in the league.
Will?
Yeah, with Felipe Franks thing, it all comes down to confidence. I think Nick was touching on it just there, but we've seen a totally different guy, and I don't know how that translates on the field, but the guy really operates with a sense of conviction, it looks like, and he's placed in positions where I don't want to say he's, foolproof or bulletproof, but he's placed in situations that are high success rate for him that tap into his skill set. So I don't know how much he's going to prove early on or not. But he has the opportunity to really build off of, a strong finish to this year. And that's a hell of a lot better than what we were talking about him 12 months ago.
Right, and I think a lot of it just rests on what your expectations are and what bar you're setting for Felipe Franks, right? I think that he can be a good quarterback, can be a great quarterback, potentially. I think what Florida needs out of him is, he only had, 6 turnovers last year, and he had 31 touchdowns, that he was associated with. So Florida can get, a few less interceptions or turnovers and, keep a similar touchdown number, then, I think that Florida's going to be happy. I mean, Dan Mullen has always had quarterbacks that have focused on, production and moving the ball forward and not necessarily just putting up gaudy stats. And I think as long as you have that, and as long as he's running with the confidence he did of a wild giraffe last year, and he's putting the ball where it needs to be and limiting those turnovers, then, I think that that's where, he can be and where he will be. I think the idea and expectation of him being this prolific passer that takes over, the NCAA or the SEC is probably a little far-fetched. But, if he has confidence, he limits those turnovers, he can be, enough of a quarterback and add in all of the other skill positions that Florida has. That's all you really need out of him.
Thomas and Silk, just to extend quarterback and not so much Felipe Franks. How much do we see Emory Jones this year? And I'm of the belief, I think this team goes as far as good as Felipe Franks can take them. And it rests on his shoulders of 10, 11, 12, even more wins maybe. Do you save him in some form or fashion if it's 3rd and short, 4th and short, goal line to go situations? Are there situations those you put Emory Jones in those situations just to save Felipe Franks from taking so many hits?
I think we used him in situations last year. Even when he was a true freshman, they was trying to redshirt him. In the Georgia game, he came in certain situations. I think that goes up a bit this year. I don't know how much he uses him in the first game or when he starts, but I think he plays a lot of situational football for us. This is just a guess at this point, but yeah, that's my opinion that he does.
See, my thinking's probably a little different. I think that he's definitely going to play some this year. I mean, Dan Mullen's process of developing quarterbacks, it kind of relies on throwing those guys into live situations where it actually matters. But I do think when you have a pretty new offensive line, I think they're going to be cautious about doing that in maybe the big games because I don't think you want to throw that line for a loop necessarily in key situations. I think that can be the difficulty maybe this year compared to last year where you had multi-year starters and those guys were pretty confident. I don't know that you're going to want to do that quite as much in some of these big games, but that's my thinking.
I can see that too.
Now we'll move on. Silk sent this question in earlier, kind of in line with what I was going to ask too. Offensive line's a big question too, but I don't think we can forget about the defensive line as well in the trenches at Florida. Does Florida's offensive line, defensive line hold up against some of the top talent, some of the better teams in the SEC? And Will, I'll start with you.
So you mean I don't get to talk about how much I like Emory Jones?
Well, go ahead. We're right on the heels of that one. Go right ahead.
Will,
David,
Will's a noted Emory Jones hater. Don't even give him the floor.
Oh, no. Don't get that one started.
Nick, I can like Felipe Franks, and I can like Emory Jones just the same. And I'll prove it to you this season, too.
If you'd say so.
I'll prove it to you this year.
Nick, are you still on the Traskov?
I'm still on the trash train just because I can't be a
He's the queen bee.
Just because I can't be a flip-flopper, I'm still the conductor of the trash train. But we're running fast because there's not many people on board anymore.
Hey man, so many people saved my trash tweets all these years for no reason. That's beautiful.
All right, Will. What about Emory?
Well, I mean, I just love Emory Jones, man. I'm a huge Emory Jones fan. All of a sudden, like the more people I talk about with him, the more I like him. I just like how the guy just has that sense of confidence with him, and he just doesn't have any sort of like insecurity with him. I think he's really secure, and I think that's a really cool thing for a backup QB, and he's always sort of been that way from what I gather. I mean, I think that's such a huge character trait that people overlook as far as the quarterback room. And we saw that with Felipe Franks just a couple of years ago with how insecurities could kind of play into the way you look on the field. And so for Emory Jones not to have that, as far as my estimation goes, that's big, man. I don't know how much he's going to play, but I'm already excited about him. I know Jacob Copeland gets a lot of love these days, and rightfully so. But man, I'm high on Emory Jones heading into if not this year, next year for sure.
Quick question: what kind of camp? Like, I haven't seen a whole lot of information about what type of camp he's having.
He's progressed as far as I don't want to say accuracy. I want to use a Dan Mullen phrase here and say ball placement. So he's improved. He's improved in that area a little bit. So I think that's pretty important. And I think he just has a better understanding of the offense. He's a lot more confident. If he talks to the wide receivers, they'll tell you that he's a lot more confident in just going through his reads. I think that's one of the things that Freddie Swain may have mentioned. Is he said this, I think, about all the QBs, but really Emory Jones in particular is his ability to not just lock into that one guy, but go through his second read, go through the progression, go to the check down if necessary.
Yeah, we'll bounce back to the question: offensive line, defensive line in the trenches. Nick, I'll start with you now. Is there enough talent there for Florida to stand up against some of the better teams? LSU, Georgia, probably top two teams are going to face this year in overall talent. Is there enough talent in the trenches for the Gators to get it done? Say if an injury or two happens along, the starting five, starting four on both sides of the ball.
I certainly on defense. I'm not really worried about that. I think maybe you worry about inside. I'm still high on TJ Slayton. That's going to end up being like a me and Kyle Trask situation if it doesn't happen this year. But I'm still high on TJ Slayton. I love the guy. I love the starters. But I'm still waiting for Conliffe and Slayton to prove me right. To me, on the offensive line, I think it gets trickier. I've been hearing great things about Ethan White, and I think they still love their front five, their first five. But losing Noah Banks is a guy that could have played four positions for you on the offensive line, and I think that was a big loss for Florida. I think they anticipated it because he hadn't been on the practice field for a little while before he made the decision to medically retire. So they weren't really necessarily counting him in based on his history and what he was going through at the time during camp. But yeah, I think if everyone stays healthy magically, I think you're fine. If you start getting injuries, multiple injuries, then I think you start to worry. But I mean, how many teams in the country can withstand losing two or three offensive linemen and still feel good about themselves? I do like the first five. I like the left side more than the right side, and I'm really interested to see Ethan White in action because I think John Hevesy likes him, and I've heard nothing but positive things, not only about his dedication to changing his body, which you can see, but just how he's moving and how he's playing, and he seems to be one of those nasty road grader offensive line types.
Thomas, is there a player on the offensive line we're not really or that we're overlooking, not necessarily talking enough about?
I don't think so. I mean, it's hard to say with guys that haven't played a whole lot. I've always kind of liked Chris Bleich. But no, I mean, I think Nick pretty much nailed it. I mean, I don't really have anything to add to that. I think when you talk about Miami and the season opener, I don't have a whole lot of concerns about that first group. The big issue is what does that unit look like come Georgia, and come November? That's the big question for me.
Attrition.
Yeah, if it's the same five, and we're talking about that, game 8? Somewhere around there, and it is
exactly.
Is that same starting five? Then you
feel great about the East.
Yeah.
I mean, then you feel great about your chances. And on the flip side, I don't feel that way about the D-line at all. I think the D-line, you may not have a Ja'Kai Polite this year that's going to put up ridiculous numbers, but you look across the board, man, you're 8 to 10 deep, where I don't think there's a whole lot of drop off in any of those guys. I mean, you go from Jabari Zuniga to Zach Carter, that's not a big drop off. Same thing with Greener to Moon, who's had Moon's had a really good camp. So I think, across the board on the D-line, I don't have a whole lot of concerns. I think you're deep enough there. It's just, what does that O-line look like come the end of the season?
Dan, we could probably say, a few months ago, we weren't necessarily worried about defensive back depth. And now C.J. McWilliams and John Huggins and what's going on there and what happens nickel and star and how do they figure out, depth behind that position. I'm still not at the point now where I'm worried about that. As long as Trey Dean stays healthy, you have him there to count on. Florida's history of freshman defensive backs coming in and being able to live up to the expectation and live up to the accolades that they have when they come in and make plays right away. I'm not at the point where I'm worried yet. Is it okay for worry to creep in for some fans out there of what happens with C.J. McWilliams and John Huggins in the depth there now?
I think it's okay to be cautiously optimistic and hope that it all works out. At the end of the day, Florida has two, great cornerbacks. Probably two of the better cornerbacks in the NCAA that are back there, and they've recruited well. The problem is despite the phrase, the further you are away from the ball, the easier it is to kind of learn and pick up. There is definitely some concern whenever you have to rely on freshmen that you probably weren't expecting to play this year. Now, I do say all of that to say that I do think that Hill, Elam, and Kimbrough are all capable cornerbacks this year to potentially play. I think if that happens, if there is an injury to Wilson or Henderson, that Trey Dean is going to move over. But once he does that, I am a little bit worried about what you do at nickel. I know that they're talking about maybe moving Amari Burney back to nickel, but there's definitely some question marks that are there, and they're young back there. That doesn't mean that they're not talented or they're not experienced. I also think, I disagree with Thomas a little bit. I think that Florida could have a better defensive line this year than they did last year, just because I think that you have some guys that have been in the system a little bit longer. But also, I would say that, their defense isn't necessarily predicated on having two lockdown cornerbacks either. I think that Todd Grantham, is pretty sophisticated in his scheming when it comes to coverage in the back end. So Florida does have to rely on Elam or Hill or Kimbrough to play meaningful snaps. I think that Florida should be able to compensate because they do have a really strong team around them on the defensive side of the ball.
Just to clarify, I actually think the D-line can be better than last year as well. I was just saying that even though you don't necessarily have a polite, I think you're so deep across the board that you're going to be able to roll 2-3 deep without really seeing any drop-off.
My apologies.
Silk and Will, I'll get you in here, and Dan brought up one player I definitely wanted to bring up, and Amari Burney. Does he really have a set position the way we're moving forward now? I know we all wanted to see him at linebacker, and that's the position that looked like he was going to take and just kind of take over. But with what's happened at nickel and the star and the depth there, and maybe he slides over there, or maybe some type of rotation and he gets slid back to safety. I'm looking at there may be a point where we don't really pinpoint a position here for him this year. He's just lined up all over the field.
You just gotta get your best 11 on the field. If it's somebody hurt and Burney being at the star gets your best 11 on the field, that's what you gotta do. He's good enough of a talent to do that. He can play both positions. So it's this type of guys they try to recruit to get those guys that are flexible that can play multiple positions, man.
Another thing to mention is this isn't the first time we've heard Amari Burney going into both rooms. He was talking about that, and Todd Grantham was talking about that in the spring. So it's not like all of a sudden he's trying to, absorb information from both rooms. That's been going on for a while, where he's spent a little bit of time here, a little bit of time there, doing different things in different formations and whatnot. But he's super talented. He's a bright kid, and he has that skill set, and it would frankly be, coaching like malpractice to not have him be informed on both of those positions because of the lack of depth that you have. A kid like C.J. McWilliams, if you're going to rely on him, no offense to him, but if you're going to be asking him to do some heavy lifting for you like he did in a couple of games last year, you're probably already pretty screwed, to be frank, just because there's a drop off there. But with John Huggins, that's the guy who obviously compromises your depth quite a bit, so that you don't have that ace backup or that backup safety / nickel that you would otherwise have. But you do have Burney's versatility where you could slide him over there and play a James Houston or a Ventrell Miller alongside David Reese. And those are two guys who I think are really a lot better than what people give them credit for. and they have the potential to continue to improve. And if you talk to people around that program, Ventrell Miller is an excellent athlete who people have told me actually leads that room in more ways than David Reese does, just because he's more vocal. And James Houston, out of all those linebackers, he's the guy that people say has the ability to go to the NFL, which is, kind of makes you, raise your eyebrows a little bit when you hear that. But they're not saying that, just off the top of their head. I mean, they see this every day. So I think there's a lot more depth when you look at the versatility across the board than what people give Florida credit for.
Yeah, I was going to jump in on that and say I think the fact that you're not hearing more names at nickelback and they are, basically talking about Bernie, it tells you a lot about that linebacker room behind David Reese, because I think Will just nailed it. I mean, those guys, they can count on those guys. Those are third-year guys in the program now, and Miller and Houston. I think it says more about them than maybe the freshman corners not being ready or anything like that. I think Bernie's the play all the way if they have to shift guys around, and then you feel comfortable with those other linebackers.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go. Maybe we may save this for later, but unsung players, if we talk about some guys we haven't really discussed about, and mine will go be those two linebackers, of course, because for what we heard from them and what they probably bring to the table, it does free up Bernie to go do other things. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's exactly where I was going to go if we hit on that topic. Silk, you want to jump back in, man?
On the whole Bernie thing?
No, just where are we going next?
Oh, questions I got. We can jump into this. The first game we got Miami. They named Jaron Williams the quarterback. They got Nelson, the true freshman offensive tackle, playing left tackle, and they got a redshirt freshman at the right tackle. I know I'm homerish, extra homerish, and I've been saying burgers, but I don't see a way that team gonna be able to scheme and be able to survive and score points on us. Thomas, how do you think they even cover the spread? How you think this becomes a game?
I don't think it does. I've been on record for a couple of weeks now saying I think Florida wins by at least 2 touchdowns, and that's the biggest reason. I mean, you can break down all the other matchups you want, but I just don't think Florida's going to have any trouble getting to the quarterback against a very inexperienced Miami line. And you talk about that guy going out there for his first game, man, I just have flashbacks to, Felipe Franks in that Michigan game. I don't see any way around that. I think that's the matchup that decides the game. And if you're asking me how it can be close, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I really like Manny Diaz. I think he's going to be a good coach. But you're looking at a program that, and as Silk called them, the Portal Boys, or I don't know what you call them. But he's had to piece this team together, this roster together through transfers, through JUCOs, just to field something that'll be competitive, where you've got Dan Mullen, and outside of the offensive lineman that left and some other guys, you're returning so much, and you're in year 2, and we've had guys tell us all spring, practice is faster. There's so much more stuff that's in. I forget which player told us today that we didn't, or Iverson Clement told us today. There's trick plays. There's stuff that we didn't even know about that was in the playbook because they hadn't opened it up yet because they were still learning. And I think you're going to look at a Miami team on August 24th that's still learning the system, that's still trying to figure out where am I supposed to be, what's this look, what's that look, in a Florida team that is in year 2 in a strength program and is in year 2 in a system that they're comfortable with now. And I don't know. I think I tweeted it last week or whenever. I saw the line was at 7. I don't get it. I don't know what I'm missing. But yeah, I don't really see this game being competitive. I like Thomas mentioned, I think this is kind of, to me, has Michigan, Florida from 2017 written all over it.
Well, and the coaches for Miami are going to be learning too, because that's one of the big things Dan Mullen talked about was it took them almost half a season to figure out what they had in terms of personnel. I know Manny Diaz has been there before, but you got an offensive coordinator learning new guys too for Miami. Florida doesn't have any of those issues. I mean, you got veterans on both sides of the ball that know the system. I just think you're going to see Florida come out a lot cleaner in that game.
Silk, it's funny, man. The last couple of days, mine and your tweets have been dug up about how the good we talked about Jaron Williams when Jim McElwain was recruiting him. And look, that doesn't mean the kid's not eventually going to be good or can't be good, but we just don't.
I never said he was terrible.
Exactly.
I'm confused.
Yeah, they're trying to hit us on something that's not even they're able to do that.
They need some hope.
But this is Miami's best long-term solution, I think. N'Kosi Perry was a turnover machine. Tank Martell needs a step stool to get anything done. So it's best long-term move for them. And it's Thomas said it right. The first place my head went to was Felipe Franks in Michigan. I just don't see what Todd Grantham, what he schemes, what he brings, when you don't know where blitz is coming from where, and the creativity that he has, and Jaron Williams seeing that for the first time. I don't care how much tape you watch. You're not prepared for that type of speed. You're not prepared. Miami's not doing anything in their practices that Todd Grantham's going to bring to Orlando next weekend.
What's the deal on the injury front with Campbell and DeLance? Thomas.
Well, I don't know exactly what Delance's injury is. I've heard conflicting things on that. I would say he's probably questionable right now for Miami. I know he's on crutches, which doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot. Sometimes they have those guys, anytime it's an ankle injury or something, they'll put him on it just to take weight off. But I don't think Kyrie Campbell should be much of an issue. He's got a light groin strain and is pretty much day-to-day at this point.
Okay, cool.
So I think Will has.
Go ahead, Will. My bad.
Well, I think any sort of injury on the offensive line, though, I mean, even if it's minor, it's kind of questionable just because it's like, who's your sixth guy still? It's like, dude, I don't know like who that guy would be, because last year they had what you would call like a utility guy where, you could plug in a Noah Banks or somebody like that who could play a variety of positions for you. I don't know who that guy is on Florida's second team on the offensive line. So even like a smaller issue for me, just don't know like how that impacts the rest of the line.
How do we see the safety positions shaking out? I heard Sean Davis is having a good camp, and Donovan Steiner as well, and Juwan Taylor was looking like two of those three is going to be the guy. How you see it shaking out?
I think Sean Davis is just taking. I mean, when you have a safety or anyone that's tackling with a shoulder issue, they're going to be in a non-contact jersey. So Juwan Taylor's limited by that jersey, and I think what you're seeing is Sean Davis taking that next step. And now, where last year maybe he didn't take advantage of those extra reps, I think you're starting to see it now. And I've always been high on Sean Davis. I think the hate for Juwan Taylor and Donovan Steiner goes too far. But yeah, I think that's a good situation for Florida. If you've got two guys, one in Juwan Taylor who is older, Donovan Steiner's also played a lot, and then you've got a guy in Sean Davis where you might be able to have a rotation and keep guys fresh.
Hey, guys that were out at practice, I guess, Nick, Thomas, Will, are we going to see much out of Quincy Linton this year? I was high on him coming out of high school, and I know that he's had a lot of injuries in high school and in college. So you guys going to see the field this year, or?
He's another guy that could factor in that star position. That's rep there, and depending on, because I mean that star position. If you're in a 3rd and 15, you don't want an extra linebacker on the field. That's when you would like to have Trey Dean there. That's when you'd like to have another defensive back there. You start moving those guys over. Jeremiah Moon's not playing nickelback on 3rd and 12. That's not putting him in the best position to be successful. So I think you could see Quincy Linton. It's just. You just got to stay healthy. I mean, if you're not on the practice field, if you're not getting reps, the coaches aren't going to feel comfortable to put you in the game.
Yeah, the weird thing here is, and I think it's easy to gloss over just because of off-field issues. But Brad Stewart, we talk about the improvement with other players and all that, but he just gets glossed over because a lot of us don't, whether there's a rumored suspension at the beginning of the season or wherever that is, if he's on the field or date back to last year when he had to miss some time. His name wasn't brought up. Is it just because of his best ability this year will be availability?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's safe to say at this point.
Yeah, no doubt. You have to be at the practices, to kind of further develop. But you mentioned Quincy Linton. It's hard to say anything really about him just because when you talk about the safety position, a lot of times you're talking about communication. And with Sean Davis and Taylor and Steiner, the coaching staff could rely on those guys so much now because they've improved in those areas. And they are more comfortable, I think, with one another, but also with just making calls and getting themselves in the right positions to make plays. I think that's where we've seen and heard them take some big steps forward. So we'll see how that translates. But right now, it does seem like they're developing and taking that next step, which only makes sense in the second year under Todd Grantham.
So you good or?
Yeah, I think I'm good, man. I just get some. What's the record prediction? What you got, Dave?
I got 10-2. I go back and forth. I hate it. I penciled Georgia in as a loss. I hate doing that. And then I'm not so scared of the trip to Baton Rouge as other people are. That Florida LSU matchup, it's always close. It can go either way. I still think it could be one of those games you're not supposed to lose, whether, the bugaboo of Missouri over and over again or the trip to Columbia, South Carolina or whatever. It still may be one of those games you're expecting Florida to go win and they trip up there. LSU is the obvious choice. Auburn's the other one there. But I still think it might be one of those other games that just sneaks up and gets Florida in a 10-2 season.
Will?
I'm going 9-3. I have a loss to Georgia, probably a loss at LSU, and I think that Missouri game is going to be pretty tough. I think Missouri is a tough team to sort of pin down because they have a couple of unknowns there. You don't know how that quarterback, what they're going to get from their new quarterback. You just know he's probably going to be at least somewhat solid. But yeah, that's just a game that has all the makings of a trap game, and historically it's been tough for Florida anyway.
Yeah, their quarterback's Kelly Bryant.
Again. Yeah, if I lose Missouri again, bro.
Sorry, man.
Can anyone explain that? Like, I don't get it. Like, Missouri hasn't. I mean, they went to the SEC championship game a couple years in a row.
Odom's a good coach, dude.
In a really bad SEC, but like, I don't get it. Every game with Florida and Missouri is weird too.
Even Barry Odom is terrific. I agree.
And Kelly Bryant in that kind of offense where he can run around and create a little bit as well as throw. I'm not saying he's only a runner. He can throw the ball too, but he can be dangerous in a spread offense like Missouri is going to run. So
yeah, he's not the thrower Drew Lock is. So they're going to have to cater to him somewhat. You can't go out there and run the same offense that they ran last year with Drew Lock. So that's the question I have. It's not plug and play. It's not plug and play. Yeah, it's not plug and play with that offense. So.
I picked Florida to be 10-2 this year. I'm with Will. I think those are the three games that he circled that I would say are the toughest. LSU, Georgia, and Missouri. The thing I go back to is I think Florida is obviously moving in the right direction under Dan Mullen. And the reason I've got Florida being 10-2 as opposed to 9-3 is because I have a lot of confidence in Dan Mullen and his staff, particularly with as many veterans as they've got, to be able to work some serious game plans around individual teams and take advantage. I think the biggest thing that I would like to see from Florida moving forward is not having these positions like the O-line where, if the unit looks different come October or November, you're looking at the worst case scenario. When Urban Meyer was at Florida, and I know it's an impossibly high standard to achieve, but like 9 wins was like the baseline. Like nobody nationally or otherwise was picking Florida to win less than 9 games. I don't think Florida's there yet. I think, you look at issues like the O-line, long term for Florida to get where Florida needs to be, you've got to start to shore up that depth chart a little bit more. That's the one thing that's kind of keeping me like, I'm picking them to win 10 games, but I could also see them only winning 8 if things go wrong,
Gotcha, Dan. Or Nick.
Dan, go.
Yeah, I as the only person on this panel last year to pick the Gators to win 10 games, I feel like my opinion is probably the one you guys have been waiting for the most. And I feel like Florida is going to go – I think they're going to go 11-1 this year.
Where's the loss, Dan?
This is the thing. I think that Florida has a loss on there, and I know that they are favored to win every game right now except for LSU Georgia, and I don't know if I've seen an Auburn line yet. I think if Florida can stay healthy, which is what we're assuming when we give our prediction, if a catastrophic number of injuries happen, then I'm going to put an asterisk next to that number, and I can deem it whatever I think we're going to do from there. But, I don't think that Auburn is as good as people are giving them credit for. I think that they've got an unbelievable defense. I think they're going to have difficulty on the offensive side of the ball, and I really don't trust Gus Malzahn as a head coach. I think that he goes up and down too much. LSU, again, I don't buy into the Joe Burrow hype. I think that he's fine. I think if Florida could beat them last year, then they can definitely beat them this year. I think that Florida is a better team this year than they were last year when they beat them, and I don't think that LSU is markedly better either. Georgia is a potential loss, but they're also replacing their top 6 wide receivers, or top 6 receivers from last year. They're replacing their running back. Obviously, they have a bunch of talent on their team, but there's still some question marks, and I don't necessarily think that Kirby Smart is an outstanding coach. Again, I think Florida's better than last year. I think that Georgia might be, as good as they were last year, but you have to remember that Florida was playing C.J. McWilliams, who, unfortunately did get burned a number of times for a couple scores, and then for whatever reason, they couldn't figure out how to guard Isaac Nauta on that drive towards the end of the first half there. So if that happens, if they do a little bit better job there, then you're talking about that game being a 1-score game or even closer than that. So, and I think that FSU is trash. I think Miami's trash. Missouri could be a trap game, but again, they lost some talent too at the wide receiver and the tight end position. So, there is a lot of reason for hope, and I'm just cheerfully optimistic.
My biggest thing with Georgia is, man, they got a new play caller.
Did Dan just talk for 12 minutes without saying who the loss was actually going to be to?
Yes. Yeah. Politician in the making, Nick.
He absolutely did. But I think the main thing with Georgia is they got a new play caller. You know what I'm saying? It's not the same offense. So I want to see how James call the plays and whatnot.
Fully.
Yeah. I want to see what he do, man.
I mean, his knock at Miami was he got too pass happy at times. Offense was predictable. He was a lot like Jim McElwain to the point where they'd score early on. He could script plays pretty good, but after that, you didn't know what he was doing. You couldn't figure out what he was doing. So
no feel for the game.
Yeah. So hey, maybe they score quick and next Saturday, but that might be about it.
Let's go, Nick.
Yeah, I've got 10-2. I actually picked Florida to win the East at SC Media Day when we filled our ballot out.
So you were one of the ones.
I was one of them. Yeah. I think they're undefeated going into LSU, like Dan said. I think Auburn might have the best defensive line in the country, but I don't know why the rest of their team is getting credit for how good one position group is. I really don't have any faith in their ability at quarterback or how they're going to be able to move the ball, especially against the Florida defense that I think really high of. I think the games to me, the circle, or was what everyone else said at LSU, at Georgia, and then I think Dan Mullen has got some Steve Spurrier, some Urban Meyer in him, and I think you'll see a different team when Florida goes to Missouri, because I don't know if he said, I think we let Georgia beat us twice. I don't know if that was just for the public, that's what he said, but I think he'll take losing to that Missouri team to heart, and that'll be a really big point of emphasis to beat Missouri. I know it's a tough place to play. It's really hard to get to. Columbia, Missouri, if you've never been, you're not missing out. Don't worry about it.
That's right.
But yeah, at LSU and I think that Georgia game are really the ones to circle.
And I think Florida also has a favorable schedule when it comes to bye weeks. Playing at week 0, you're given 3 bye weeks, and they play one game, they have a week off, and then they play 7, and they have a week off, and they play 2, then they have a week off, or something similar to that. So there's an opportunity for them to get healthy, rest up, and prepare for their big games. And their big games are at the ends of those stretches. So depending on how, or at the beginning, of that Georgia game comes off a bye. So I think depending on their ability to stay healthy, they've got a really good chance of being 10-2, 11-1, hell, maybe even 12-0. I see Thomas excited about maybe 12-0.
It's not happening. I got news for you.
Well,
not too good.
Let me flip flop on one of my picks real quick. I forgot that Dan Mullen completely has Dave Aranda's number against LSU, and I always forget about that. But that dude cannot. I mean, he always is prepared for. I don't know what it is to pinpoint it, but he wins that matchup, and it's not even close. The last couple of times they've played, and I don't know what it is, but I'm hesitant to pick LSU in that game now that I remember that. But I still think that you're still asking for things to break right if you're going with the 10 wins, and you're asking a lot of Felipe Franks, I think, to take that next step forward and not be the reason why you lose games. I'm not saying he's going to win you games, but he can't be the reason why you lose games anymore.
I mean, it's hard to forecast what Georgia does, but does 10-2 get Florida and Atlanta?
No.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Unless their two losses are to Tennessee Martin and Lipscomb or whoever, Towson or whoever it is, but whoever wins that Florida Georgia.
I'm saying in a make sense way. Just 10-2. Would 10-2 get Florida to Atlanta?
If one of those wins is against Georgia.
It's Georgia. Yep. That's the only way.
That's the game. Yeah.
If you lose to LSU and Missouri and beat Georgia and everyone else, you can get in.
Yeah.
Well, also Florida could get to the Peach Bowl at 10-2. So, Dave, I think that you're onto something there.
Hey, I got us undefeated in the playoffs, bro.
Just say it, Silk. Say it with your chest.
Hey, bro. Hey, I'm gonna let y'all know how we do in the playoffs. My prediction on that: after we beat Miami, I'm gonna let y'all know how I'm feeling about what I'm saying, what we do with the Bama in the playoffs. But right now, I got us in the playoffs.
So we're going to do it to Bama in the SEC championship game and the playoff?
I don't know if I got that much. Yeah, hold on. I can fix this line up a little bit. I have LSU winning the West.
There we go.
So we play LSU twice, and then Bama slips in. They don't fall down too low. They have one L2 and get in the playoffs. Two SEC teams in the playoffs. I wasn't prepared for that, but I could spin anything.
I wasn't letting you get off easy.
So I think that's it, man. We'll do another one at one of these bye weeks. We got to figure it all out. So the next Gator panel will be bye week. Reconvene. See where we at.
I guess it makes sense. Bye week before Georgia, kind of halfway point in the season.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Somewhere around there. All right, guys. That was fun.
Like always, appreciate you fellas joining on, man.